Sarah Carter's big discovery that I think is a blockbuster and frankly a game changer. We now know about Bruce Orr, his contacts never ending with Christopher Steele, and the desire for Christopher Steele to get this information working with Bruce Orr to the special counsel. That would be Robert Mueller. That is the unverified, salacious dossier that he himself wouldn't even stand by. And then, of course, a series of 70-plus contacts, including text messages and meetings and emails, etc. Anyway, what is really fascinating in all of this is this last round that Sara had just picked up yesterday, where they're talking about, remember, you got to put it in a context. The most important aspect of this is a firewall, the next smoking gun, but it was 2 days before that, or 2 days after that, there was going to be the testimony, in fact, of James Comey before Congress. So then the question is, okay, well, can you explain when he says, hi, I'm just wondering if you had any news? Obviously, we're a bit apprehensive given scheduled appearance before Congress on Monday, hoping the important firewalls will hold. Or writes back, no, I believe my earlier information is accurate. I'll let you know immediately if there's any change. Sounds to me like I haven't heard anything else. I assume the firewalls are holding. Remember, he's afraid of Senator Grassley's inquiries about Steele. He was afraid of the Senate Intel Committee's inquiries into Steele. Steele was afraid of media coverage of him. And anyway, so the questions we've got to really get some answers to. Why was Monday so important? Monday was the day Comey was going to testify before Congress. They're nervous here. We're a bit apprehensive about this. What are they apprehensive about? What are the firewalls that they're talking about holding? What does that mean? What are they trying to cover up here? Sarah Carter, who broke this story, Fox News investigative reporter and contributor. Greg Jarrett, 3 weeks and running now, the #1 New York Times best-selling book in the entire country, The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton and frame Donald Trump. Attorney David Schoen, civil rights attorney, liberties attorney, and criminal rights attorney. Sarah, I've just gone over this again and again and again in my mind, and to me the firewall is that basically everybody has come up with a story and they're all going to stick to it.
Exactly. And this is exactly why Congress has to question everybody involved, not just Bruce Orr, but today George Toscas is being questioned. And remember, he was the DOJ head of counterintelligence, also involved in this. I'm sure they're going to be asking him a lot of questions. How was Bruce Orr involved in this? Who authorized Bruce Orr to be the back channel for Christopher Steele in the DOJ? And then who authorized the FBI to continue to use Christopher Steele through Bruce Orr? And this firewall bombshell, which it really is, suggests that they had put in place parameters, methods of protecting themselves from Congress, from the government, hiding this information. And it's not surprising, Sean, because all you have to do is look at the foreign intelligence surveillance warrant that was taken out on Carter Page, which was originally written about by the House Intelligence Committee in their Russia report, and later, released in a redacted version to the public and to Congress, where you can see that they never mention that Bruce Orr is being used as a conduit. They never mention that they had fired Christopher Steele and that he was no longer supposed to be a part of the Bureau's investigation because he basically broke all their rules, but they continued to use him. And where they never really at all mentioned that the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee was using their Perkins Coie cutout, their law firm, to pay for this information. I mean, there's just so much here. And let's not forget that Bruce Orr's wife, Nellie Orr, was working for Fusion GPS in 2016, and now there's stories out there that she got a ham radio that year, and there's curiosity about that in Congress. Why would she be using a ham radio to communicate all of a sudden? What was she worried about? So there are a lot of questions out there. There are a lot of significant information in these text messages and in these emails that were eventually given to Congress, and I'm sure they're going to be asking those questions.
Greg Jarrett, let's go to you, and my interpretation is pretty clear on this. And, what are the firewalls, plural, and what does it mean that I believe my earlier information is still accurate, and why was he so apprehensive? Because Comey's testifying on Monday.
Well, Christopher Steele knew that he had committed various acts of illegality. He had used a phony document that he just made up, frankly, because he had a stated purpose. The purpose he told the Department of Justice was that he would do anything to stop Trump from becoming president. And, our government knew this. The FBI knew it, the DOJ knew it, and they didn't care. They were more than happy to use a phony document that was preposterous on its face. So Steele, once Trump gets elected and things begin to unravel and his name emerges in the media, by March of 2017, he is frantic that he's going to be exposed for his illegality. So in one text message, he tells Bruce Orr at the Department of Justice that Senator Grassley's letter may implicate him. In another text, he's worried about Comey testifying before Congress and exposing him. In still another, he's fretting about the Senate Intelligence Committee contacting him with questions that he can't answer honestly without admitting to his illegal conduct.
Let me throw one question back to Sarah. Would Orr have written 302s on the context that, or the conversations, or maybe just the person-to-person contacts that he had with Christopher Steele? Would that be standard operating procedure?
I would assume that those 302s were all written by the FBI when they interviewed Orr. Now, Orr, I would think, would have standard operating procedure. I think it would be a shame if he did not take notes when he was talking to Christopher Steele, because he wanted to document them. And that's why we see these law enforcement sensitive documents where, Orr had basically written down notes every time he was conversing with someone or meeting with someone. Why
are there some 13 requested 302s as it relates to Orr and Steele, if I'm not mistaken?
Because those are, as they're related to Orr and Steele, because those are the ones that the Congress wants, that now Greg may have a different information here on this. Those were the ones, from my understanding, that the FBI, when they interviewed Orr, had on him. And those were the conversations in which in the Russia document, which we see the Russia report handed out by the House Intelligence Committee, which revealed that Christopher Steele had told Orr that he would basically do anything to ensure that Trump was not elected president. And that was so important, because why at that moment, knowing the bias of this foreign spy, why at that moment would they continue to work with him without any actual evidence of any type of collusion or any type of connection between the Trump campaign and Russia? Why were they willing to continue to take this? And I think we know the answer to that. It's because they were also willing, Sean, to do anything to ensure that Trump would not become president.
Let me bring in David Schoen. As you read these words, you've done a lot of criminal cases in your life, and a lot of text messages and emails come back to haunt people. I've got to imagine when he's talking about we're apprehensive about Comey's testifying in 2 days and hoping the firewalls hold and so on and so forth. Why is it so important? What does that sound like to you?
Well, apprehensive sounds like petrified to me, frankly. I could not agree more with your characterization of this whole new chapter here. This brings your investigation, frankly, of the Mueller investigation and what's been going on to a completely different level. Nobody in the country should be able to say now that we don't need a special counsel to investigate, or someone should go begging to Mueller to call it off, call all bets off, because the can of worms has been opened now with this Orr business. Look, you already proved all that you needed to prove with the Comey, the Strzok, the Rosenstein, all of the misconduct that's gone on. But this is beyond the pale. This is now a Justice Department official. This is his wife. That's not an afterthought, of course. Her GPS fusion connection. This is really heavy, heavy stuff. I don't think you have any sense yet of how big this could be. And now you know, if there are any question remaining, why these documents have been withheld.
Well, I think what we're going to discover, we still have to get the unredacted FISA applications, and I think we're going to find, as we have already learned, but now we'll have the proof of it, that it relied heavily on this unverified, salacious dossier that Hillary paid for with Russian sources, that they basically recycled the same information to the court vis-a-vis Michael Isikoff, and that they probably defended Christopher Steele's character, even though they had ended up firing him for lying, among other things, and leaking. So,
by the way, what you also know now is what a joke it is to suggest that the footnote in the FISA application was sufficient in any way to discuss the lack of reliability.
They knew Hillary paid for it. It was a lie by omission and a fraud committed upon the court. Yes. And I think all of this now is going to come into the forefront. Can
I just jump in with one thing here? I have, among the 63 pages that I have of Bruce Orr, his texts, his emails, I also have 32 pages of his handwritten contemporaneous notes of all of his conversations, or most of them, with Christopher Steele. They're dated, and some of them are very hard to understand. He has really poor handwriting, like a doctor, and some of it is cryptic. But, in one case, I'm just reading one of them right here. He's talking about how Christopher Steele is worried about Comey and Comey testifying before Congress. And so when Orr testifies behind closed doors on the 28th of this month, I am positive that the questioners will ask him to decipher line by line all 32 pages of his contemporaneousness. What does this line mean? What did this sentence mean? What does this even say? And it's going to be a very difficult, laborious process, but it needs to be done because I suspect it will be very revealing.
All right, we're going to pick up our discussion. Also, Brennan loses his security clearance. Who else should be losing those clearances? Why is that important? We'll get to all those details as our panel continues. Greg Jarrett, David Schoen, Sara Carter. As we continue with Greg Jarrett, 3 weeks in a row now, his book is #1 on the New York Times list, The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton, frame Donald Trump. David Schoen, civil liberties attorney, criminal defense attorney. Sara Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor. I want to go back to this Trump Tower meeting and Fusion GPS, and we have Sara, the Fusion GPS, and Glenn Simpson. They're meeting with this Russian woman. You're really good at saying her name, much better than I am. I just say the Russian lawyer.
I may say it wrong, Sean. Who knows?
Okay, but they met before the Trump Tower meeting and after the Trump Tower meeting, and we find out now that she's a client of Fusion GPS. And in other words, Fusion GPS has Russian clients.
Yes, so she is actually a client through Prevazon Holdings, which hired Fusion GPS, a man by the name of Denis Katsiev, who was actually barred. He was considered an oligarch, connected to the Russians and the death of Sergei Magnitsky, who, remember, was William Browder's partner. And this was part of this whole thing about the Magnitsky Act, where we barred oligarchs, Russian oligarchs, from the U.S., from owning homes or in our banking systems or conducting business here. And we also, which set off this big battle between us and Russia. And then the Russians stopped the adoption of Russian children. And this was apparently what was supposed to be discussed at this meeting at Trump Tower. What we find out is that Natalia Veselnitskaya, or Veselnitskia, however you want to pronounce it, she was the Russian lawyer that basically was supposed to have this information on Hillary Clinton, and she came to the tower to speak with Donald Trump Jr. and the others, and along with her was actually a Russian intelligence officer, a former Russian intelligence officer by the name of Renat Akhmenishan. He shows up as well. Now, he's living in the United States, and there's some suspicion that Renat Akhmenishan may have something to do with Christopher Steele, and that he was actually supplying a lot of the information to Christopher Steele, a lot of this erroneous information. Now what we know is that the night before and the night after, she had been meeting with Glenn Simpson, and according to her own testimony, now, whether or not this is true, who knows, this is what she stated, is that she was given pointers on what to discuss when she went by Glenn Simpson, when she went to Donald Trump, to meet with Donald Trump Jr. And remember, he didn't reach out to her. It was through a familiar friend that reached out to Donald Jr. and said that this Russian attorney wanted to meet with him.
This is yet another connection, if you will. There's Russian connections all over this, except none of them have to do with Donald Trump. 800-941-SEAN is our number. We'll have more with Greg Jarrett, Sara Carter, David Schoen.
It's Exposing left-wing media bias. No stone left unturned. The Sean Hannity Show is back on the air.
We continue now. Sara Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor, David Schoen, civil rights and liberties attorney, criminal defense attorney, and now 3 weeks in a row, the #1 New York Times bestseller, Greg Jarrett, The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton and frame Donald Trump. David, let me bring you into this. The president has every right to revoke this security clearance. Frankly, I think a stronger question is, why did he have one in the first place?
Right. Look, I'm going to try to encapsulate this issue in just a couple of seconds. The president, you're absolutely right, has absolute authority, comes under Article 2 as an executive power, and specifically the court has said under his power as commander-in-chief. There's the United States Supreme Court case, Department of Navy versus Egan, which they said flatly, no one has a right to a security clearance. It's at the discretion of the president. Listen, the best argument the other side has that they keep rehashing here is, well, it's always been done. Donald Trump wasn't elected to keep business as usual. It had to be examined. There's no reason for someone like Brennan to have a security clearance, and he has abused it. When he says things like Trump is afraid that the Russians have something on him, people see him as a former CIA director with access to security clearance, and therefore he must know what he's talking about. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and he just continues to talk. By the way, no more than he knew what he's talking about on policy issues. Remember, he was the person in 2010, who gave a speech as the Obama CIA director that Hezbollah was a moderate group that we should try to incorporate into the Lebanese government. That was his position. He undercut attacks on Hezbollah and so on. So he's not a person of judgment in the first place. But the courts have said over and over again that the merits of security clearance decisions are insulated from judicial review. Alan Dershowitz last night said, well, maybe the ACLU would sue if he's being singled out because of his criticism of the president. So that would be so-called, viewpoint discrimination. Listen, the courts, not on security clearance issues, but on other issues have said you can't, even if there's no right, you can't exclude someone because he or she is black or green or whatever, or, a gay person, something like that. That's not this. And this isn't about a viewpoint. This is reckless talk. This is calling the President of the United States treasonous when there's no treason.
It's an open and shut case. And my commentary last night, and I stand by this today, is, well, who should have their security clearances revoked? It shouldn't just be Brennan. Mm-hmm. I think James Clapper is one, and James Comey is one, and Peter Strzok is one, and Andrew McCabe is one, and Sally Yates is one. And people like Susan Rice and Lisa Page and Bruce Orr, just to name a few. Greg Jarrett.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, John Brennan was an obvious case. I wrote a column about it today. His partisan attacks on President Trump create the very real security risk that the former CIA director would improperly use classified information to harm Trump for political reasons. This is a man who has a history of leaking, and he's disposed to exploit confidential material for partisan purposes that would jeopardize national security. But you can say the same thing, Sean, about many of the other people you just listed. Clapper, same reason. Inflammatory rhetoric. He's a risk that he's going to utilize classified information improperly. Comey's actually already had his access denied, but he is still eligible, which means, he could regain access. People like Comey, Strzok, McCabe, these people were fired for misusing their office. So there is a real and distinct risk they'll misuse classified information.
Well, I agree. Sarah.
I also am in total agreement with Greg, and I just want to go back to Clapper really quick. Remember, Clapper is being investigated also by Congress because there's insurmountable evidence that Clapper was the one that actually leaked the dossier, the contents of the dossier to Jake Tapper. So, he's another person that abused his power, and to many believe that he actually set up that meeting, that briefing with President Trump, and put together the pieces of that brief that was given to then President-elect Trump so that it would be leaked to the media, to give it validity so that it can be leaked. And let's go back to Brennan really quick,
Well,
Sean.
Sarah, before you get back to Brennan, I have one quick question. The fact that they have a security clearance, does that mean at any point, any time they want to go look at something, they have access to it, or they can just demand access to it? Have they been taking advantage of that, or is it only if they are brought into something?
I think it's compartmentalized, Sean, so it's only if they're brought into something, if they're asked something. But remember, they have access to all the previous information if they so choose that they were involved in. That was an issue also with Susan Rice. It's called historical information, and they have access to it. I think some other people that we haven't mentioned is Samantha Power as well. Remember, there was over 300 unmaskings with her signature on it, and nobody's gotten to the bottom of that. And the number of unmaskings that occurred with Susan Rice as well, and that was looking at those very private tech cuts or conversations that people had that were intercepted by the NSA overseas. So these are issues that still haven't been brought to the forefront, that still need to be investigated. And going back to Brennan, who of course had access to one of the highest levels of access to classified information, he did. He voted for a communist. It's been very curious to me that in the 1970s, remember, this was a different time. Russia was Russia. The KGB was in full force. And here was a man who supported the Communist Party. And I have never gotten a straight answer from anyone as to how John Brennan made it through his security clearance to work for the Central Intelligence Agency, when one of the main questions asked by the Central Intelligence Agency during a poly or any of that is, have you ever belonged to or supported a Communist Party? How did Brennan pass through that? I will never know, and I will never understand that, because it would be like saying I was a terrorist, but I'm no longer a terrorist, and I'd like to come work for the CIA.
All right, Sarah, you're right. Stay right there. We'll continue more with Sarah Carter, Greg Jarrett, David Schoen on the other side as we continue. All right, as we continue, Greg Jarrett is the author now 3 weeks in a row, the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Russian Hoax, the illicit scheme to clear Hillary Clinton, frame Donald Trump. David Schoen, civil liberties attorney, criminal rights attorney. Sarah Carter, investigative reporter, Fox News contributor. Greg, as far as everybody that gets fired here, whether it be, look at Clapper and his inflammatory paid-for rhetoric now, or Comey being fired, or Strzok being fired, or Yates being fired, or McCabe being fired, or, to me, you would think with the firing comes an immediate, end of any access to confidential top secrets that we might have, and their security clearance would be taken away at the time. Why isn't that part of the firing?
It really is, and it is really the underlying basis and reason for revoking a security clearance. Sally Yates, for example, was fired for insubordination by failing to carry out a presidential directive. So she's automatically a security risk to the president who fired her because she refused to carry out an order. If she has access to classified information, just like John Brennan, she might use it to try to harm the president politically. She was a hyper-political partisan. Why should the nation be put at risk?
And I don't think that Donald Trump is ever going to seek or request at any point their help and assistance on any matter.
No, so as a practical matter, nobody's going to contact these people for any assistance. And, I just want to follow up on something David said. The president has unfettered authority over national security matters. He has broader authority under the vesting clause, Article 2, but he is permitted to revoke for a stated reason or actually no reason at all.
Yeah, something we're not hearing in the media. It's shocking.
Pardon?
David, we'll give you the last word today.
No, look, both of these stories you've covered today are vitally important. This Bruce Orr thing is tremendous. But as for the security clearances, this should be a no-brainer. Again, it's not a matter of tradition here. It's a matter of national security. We got rid of these folks in public policy positions for a reason. They were voted out. To operate now as a shadow, sort of a cadre of former intelligence officers and Justice Department officials holding forth on policy matters is inappropriate, and they don't deserve the access. And by the way, Obama cut off the access of people whose viewpoint he didn't care for. and that was Tenet, Wolfowitz, and others. They weren't invited to any of the briefings anymore.
That is absolutely correct, so ostensibly cut them off. You're absolutely right. Sarah, we'll give you one more final thought also.
Well, I think the final thought here for me is, Sean, finally we're getting to the crux of the matter, and more evidence is coming forward, and eventually the American people are going to seek the truth. And I've been told by a number of sources that there probably is a very good chance that the president will intervene and declassify those pages of the FISA that the House Intelligence Committee wants in order to tell the public once and for all what actually happened.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all for being with us. Very important questions.